Housing Scrutiny Committee, 17th of September, starting at 5:30 p.m.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you to Cambridge City Council's Housing Scrutiny Committee meeting. My name is Councillor Griffin, and I am the chair of this committee meeting, taking place at 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday, the 17th of September, 2024. I will roll call councillors alphabetically by their last name to ensure that they are present. We have received apologies from Councillor Fitala, and Councillor Pounds is attending as alternates. Are you present, Councillor Bajent?
I am, Chair.
Councillor Gorthrop Wood?
Here.
Councillor Lee? He's late. Councillor Lee is late. Councillor Martelli? Here, Chair. Councillor Pounds?
Yes, I'm here, Chair.
Councillor Robertson?
Yes, present.
Councillor Swift?
Here, Chair.
Councillor Tong?
I am here, Chair. Thank you.
And Executive Councillor for Housing, Councillor Bird.
Present, Chair.
Executive Councillor for Community Safety, Homelessness, and Wellbeing, Councillor Holloway, who is attending
Present.
On Teams.
Yep, I'm present, Chair.
Thank you. I will roll call the tenant and leaseholder representatives alphabetically. We have had apologies from Justina Ullman-Jaworska. Are you present, Diane Best?
Present, Chair.
Harmony Birch?
Present, Chair.
Mandy Powell-Hardy? Oh. Okay. Diana Mins?
Present.
The officers permanently present throughout this meeting are Director of Communities, Sam Scharf, Assistant Director of Development, Ben Binns, Committee Manager, Sarah Steed, Meeting Producer, Dan Kelly. Other officers and public speakers will join us throughout the course of the meeting, and I will introduce them at the start of the relevant agenda items. Please, could I advise members of the public that the only public entrance exit from the Guildhall for committee meetings is the Pease Hill entrance. This can be accessed from the rear of the council chamber, turn right, and either use the lift or the stairs to return to the ground floor, where you can then exit the building. By the way, that lift is not working today. The other lift on the other side of the building is working if you need a lift. Meeting procedure. The committee will receive an oral presentation from officers. Members of the committee will then discuss the report and vote on the recommendations. Tenant and leaseholder representatives will participate in the debate on all agenda items, but may only vote on items in Part 1 of the agenda. Part 1 of the meeting will be chaired by the tenant leaseholder representative. I will then chair Part 2 of the agenda. Please, can I ask members of the Housing Scrutiny Committee and members of the public participating in the meeting to be respectful toward one another? And also, I'd like to remind everyone that the decision makers at this meeting are the executive councilors. Okay, so we are going to move on to agenda item 2. Please, could committee members advise if they have any declarations of interest and identify which item, agenda item, their declaration relates to. Councillor Robertson.
I have to declare an interest in item 13 on Davy Road, because I've got family living there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bajent.
I'm a member of Cambridge Cycling Campaign.
Councillor Tong.
I'm a member of Cambridgeshire Cycling Campaign, Chair.
Thank you. Other declarations of interest? Thank you. Agenda item 3, minutes of the 18th June 2024 meeting have been submitted to this meeting for approval. Are there any comments, or can these minutes be approved? Can we approve these minutes? Yes, they are approved. Okay, we are now on to agenda item 4, public questions. Public question time lasts for 30 minutes. Public speaking rules provide that members of the public must send in the text of their question in advance of the meeting, speakers will no longer read out their question, as a list of public questions has been published in advance of the meeting. The executive counselor or officer has 2 minutes to provide a response. Public speakers then have an opportunity to ask a follow-up question for up to 2 minutes, and the executive counselor or officer may respond as appropriate for up to 2 minutes. The committee manager will advise when the time periods are up. Question number 1, Dr. Chiado, would you like to introduce yourself and advise if you are speaking on behalf of a group?
Thank you, Chair. My name is Dr. Maurice Kyodo. I'm speaking on behalf of the Save Beacon Road Group.
Thank you. Would executive counselor or officer like to respond?
Thank you, Chair. Okay, there's quite a bit on this one, so I'll be as quick as I can. So, question 1. So, answer to question 1. Details of the latest proposal to redevelop Eakin Road will be available at the up-and-coming public meeting on the 1st of October 2024 at Barnwell Baptist Church. Residents and local communities are invited come along and to look at the plans and speak on the design. As the design has evolved, it has become clear that the initial decision to include the 6 houses in the right position approach, this is consistent that what was said at the HSC in June 24 and to residents at the liaison group at the same month. To avoid creating false expectations to residents, it is important to make clear that the planning application will include the redevelopment of 108 homes at Eakin Road, including the 6 houses to the east. Okay, request 2. There has been 28 reported cases of damp condensation mould on the estate. We expect that there to be further low-level cases of DCM where residents have chosen not to report this to the council. Of the 28 reported cases, 8 of these have now moved and 4 are in the process of moving. The council's regeneration policy gives priority to households where DCM has been reported. All tenants should be assured that each case is considered carefully by officers before property is allocated. We would encourage all tenants to continue bidding on properties using HomeLink and to report any DCM concerns to the council for further investigation. The last part of this question. Properties have become void what will be carefully considered in a case-by-case basis. When temporary accommodation is not suitable due to the condition of the property, the council may take the decision to keep a property as a void until redevelopment. When a block or a house is empty, we will secure the building with hoardings. That's the end of question 1, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank
Jerry,
you, Councillor.
hold on a second. Jerry, would you like to answer all of the questions there that are part of that at this time? I think that would be better, yeah.
The 3 questions we submitted have been answered by the Executive Councillor.
Okay, sorry about that. Sorry for the confusion. I'm sorry. Dr. Chiado, would you have a supplementary question? 2 minutes.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll just go through the sort of more straightforward aspects first. We we are slightly concerned about the estate becoming very, very void, and we'd like the council to work with us as residents to ensure that as it becomes emptier, that this is properly sort of maintained and things are boarded up quickly, and that we sort of know which ones we expect to be void, so we can come and tell you if there are any issues that we see in a void property. We can say, oh look, that one should be empty. There's someone in there. You might want to check that out. So we want to work with you closely on this because we're living on the street and it's important to us. With the rehousing of tenants in damp and mouldy dwellings, if there are 28 cases and 12 have been or about to be rehoused, that leaves 16. And we really hope that the council can get those people out before Christmas. Part of the impetus to do this project was to get people out of bad housing, especially to avoid another winter cycle of damp, condensation, and mould. So we really urge the council to prioritise that leading up to the winter months. But finally, the 6 houses in the North East, we've mentioned this several times, councillors, and we'll say it again. The residents, several of the residents in those 6 houses have very difficult personal circumstances, and they've said that on various occasions to officers, to councillors alike. And we maintain that it will be a bad decision by the council to take those 6 houses. There hasn't been any convincing or compelling factors or aspects put forward to the residents as to why those particular 6 need to go. They're tucked in the corner, you can build around them, they're not inhibiting the rest of the project. That would happen very smoothly without having to be perturbed by these 6. Those residents are extremely, extremely vulnerable, and to move them would cause massive amounts of harm. I can't give their personal details, but you've heard that for yourselves, you've seen that for yourselves. This is more than just bricks and mortar. These are their homes, these are their entire lives. And no amount of effective rehousing is going to solve that for them, is going to rectify that. We want to see this project go forward, but we can't support this yet. And it's going to come down to those houses in the corner and those council tenants there, and the fact that this is going to cause incredible damage to them.
Thank you. Councillor Bird, would you like to respond?
I have explained to Save Eakin Road group, and I've had many meetings with the group. Also, I had a meeting the other night with officers and some of the tenants that are affected on that northeast corner, and we did explain to them what was happening and told them to keep in contact with the officers and work with the officers about moving to. So I'm now going to pass on to Ben Binns to see what we can say.
Yes, good evening. I mean, our officers will continue to work with all tenants on the estate, including the northeast corner. Progress has been very good so far in terms of interactions with tenants and leaseholders, and we are ahead where we would expect it to be. And I would encourage anyone who's not made contact, and there aren't many, to contact our colleague Andrew Johnson in particular, in order to find out what their options are going forward. And I know every effort's been made to take into consideration whether it's mental health, schools, hospitals, whatever their requirements are. So I'd encourage that all tenants to come forward. Listening to you about the hoarding, we'll take on board your points, and we will look at that closely. It's something we want to ensure doesn't lead to further problems down the line, and we will be as quick as we can. So that's a fair comment, and we'll look at that as we move forward.
Thank you. I think it's time to move on to question number 2. Ozzy Osborne, would you like to introduce yourself and advise if you are speaking on behalf of a group?
Andrew Osborne, Unite Cambridge Engineering Branch, speaking on their capacity. Thank you.
Would the executive councillor or officer like to respond to question 2?
Thanks, Chair, and there's 2 parts to this one as well, Chair. So there are currently 15 properties unoccupied, comprising of 14 households that have moved and one leasehold property that has been brought back. Part 2 is the council would not normally undertake a risk assessment of this type. However, we would like to reiterate that all cases of DCM are given priority when bids are placed on HomeLink. In addition, the council's financial inclusion team works with tenants in financial hardship, and we will be reporting any cases that come to our attention so that support can be provided. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Ozzy Osborne, do you have a supplementary question?
It's Mr. Osborne to you, Chair. Let's just request, just for context, I think this is my anniversary, a one-year anniversary for these meetings. I'll ask exactly the same question. Could Jerry please rephrase the answer to the first question in terms of how many of the flats, 72, are currently empty? Now, I believe that at the last meeting there were 2 vacant. Is she now saying that 15 are vacant, or 14? I couldn't quite keep up. I think she's talking about the entire estate rather than the flats. And I'd like to come back to the fact it's taken 12 months and there has been virtually no movement in the fact that we're trying to empty these flats, which is considered to be damp and mouldy and dangerous to people's health. Now, I wonder what it is actually going to take. I mean, I think we need to start seeing removals down on Eakins Road, moving people out, not in, before we start seeing blue lights and flashing ambulances. It's dangerous to their health. Could Jerry please advise the number of the flats, just the flats, which are currently occupied and vacant? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Bird, would you like to respond?
What I can say is that 15 properties are unoccupied, which is flats, and 14 are the households have moved, and 1 is a leaseholder. So that makes your 15.
Thank you. We are ready to move on to question number 3. Sarah McManus, would you like to introduce yourself and advise if you're speaking on behalf of a group?
Sorry. Sarah McManus, and I'm speaking as a resident of Coleridge Ward.
Thank you. Would the executive councillor or officer like to respond? Question number 3.
Again, Chair, there's a couple of bits to this one as well, okay? So question 3, structurally, repairs and associated works to the flats at Davy Road were approved in January 21, following a report to the Housing Scrutiny Committee. The council owns a number of blocks of flats built in the 1950s and 60s. Many of these flats have structural concrete elements that need to be repaired from time to time. In view of the proposed redevelopment that we're under consideration at the time, the works at Davy Road have been reduced to a minimum required to maintain the building in a safe condition. Part 2 of your question. The council has not requested any payment towards the works. The total costs incurred by the council has currently been split between the 3 blocks. However, as 2 blocks have 12 flats and the 3rd block has 18 flats, the costs are divided equally between the number of flats in each block, which is why they differ. The cost will be accurately defined per block once all works has been completed and costs verified by the council. A full breakdown of the costs will be available once all the works are completed on site, costs verified and accounts signed off. The costs will be carried forward 24-25 accounts to be issued in September 25. No payment is expected from leaseholders this financial year for the structural works carried. The final part. As indicated in the officer's report, the standards of the existing flat blocks and masonettes are poor and do not meet the current new build design standards. Residents were asked their views on the estate in a survey in July 24, and the results include: number one, 60% of respondents said that they have damp, mould and condensation in the home. 2, 60% said their home is too cold in the winter. 3, 100% of respondents said that they have experienced antisocial behaviour at Davy Road, and around half indicated dissatisfaction with the safety and security of the estate. Number 4, accessibility. There is no level access to the properties, and a third of the respondents said that their home is not fit for their accessibility needs. Only 25% of the residents agreed that the flats are fit for their wider network needs, and residents reported family members cannot visit them because of the difficult access. The above examples of lived experience from residents of the estate provide a compelling argument for redevelopment. In addition to these required improvements, we will also improve water use, energy use, ventilation and air quality for residents. There are many people in need of a new home in the city, and by redeveloping, we can significantly increase the number of homes on the site as we approach 3,000 people on our housing register. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Sarah McManus, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do. Thank you for the answers, Jerry. So Davy Road and Fanshawe Road have both been earmarked for development by Cambridge City Council development team. So I live on Fanshawe Road, about 15 houses up from the now approved redevelopment site, and the prospective redevelopment is not one that fills my neighbours and I with hope. We have observed the lifelessness of the ironworks site a few streets away from Fanshawe Road for a few years now, how the green and lush space that was promised is in fact abandoned, and the care of the trees and plants have not been given high priority by Cambridge City Council, and how the area resembles a car park. A few days ago, a Cambridge News article revealed greater public awareness of the shabby and neglected state of the ironworks that is supposed to be a flagship project of the Cambridge Investment Partnership. Why has Cambridge City Council dropped the ball on maintenance of the ironworks? Given that this is the Cambridge City Council Housing Scrutiny Committee, presumably serving to highlight areas of improvement for Cambridge City Council, can the Executive Councillor for Housing tell us what plans are in place to improve the living area of the ironworks residents so that they feel that they are valued and not a low priority? Further, what assurances can be given that the upcoming development at Fanshawe Road, which is now approved, and the possible one at Davy Road, if it is approved, will be carefully maintained? Thank you.
Thank you. Would the Councillor Bird like to respond?
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm going to pass on to Ben Binns so he can explain more what's happening with the ironworks and stuff, and then I'll come back.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. You are right, it has been in the media about some concerns at Mill Road. Mill Road is a complex site. It's not just about the development being handed back to the council in terms of adoption of the open space. There is some shared space that is managed by a managing agent called Warwick. There's also space that is attributable to the Greater Cambridge Partnership, which is the cycleway, which is also not complete. So there are different areas that still need to be managed. That said, we've had problems with bollards, and we're working to a solution with that. That's been a number of bollards impacted by vandalism. find a solution, working with Hill and also the resident groups there, as well as Streets and Open Space, to find a solution that makes sure the bollards work. The traffic is a problem at the moment, absolutely right. The TRO has been applied for. We're waiting for the final approval of that, which then means that parking cannot just continue as it is at the moment, and people who are moving or parking in that estate to work in the city won't be allowed to do that. So I think it's fair to say there are some things that need improving, and we're working very hard to improve that. Each development will have different sets of requirements. So on Fanshawe Road, there is some open space. The plan for that will go back to the council to be managed. And we're already working out how that will work, and also in terms of the amount of time it needs for cleaning, maintenance, and so on. And of course, we're trying to learn our lessons from Mill Road and ensure that we don't have a situation with bollards or other items.
Thank you. That now concludes the public question time. Please, can I now invite Diana Mins, tenant leaseholder representative, to chair part one of this meeting.
Thank you. Our first item that I'll be chairing is agenda item 5, and that is the compliance update. And please could the Strategic Development Manager introduce this item. He's joining us online, and it's Sean Cleary.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. I hope you can hear and see me okay. Just going to go through the compliance update report. This is based on data up until the 1st of August 2024. And the recommendation is for the Executive Councillor for Housing to note the progress of the compliance-related work as detailed. So the purpose and reason for the report is to be able to update on the key elements of our compliance requirements, and that covers gas, electrical, testing, fire, lifts, Legionella and asbestos, and I have included damp mould and condensation as a supplementary attachment to this report. So if we move on to 3.1, gas safety, we are now 100% compliant on all safety certification across 6,604 properties. Electrical safety, we are 87% compliant. And the reason we are 87% compliant and not 100 is that we have moved our certification time frame from 10 years to 5 years, which has put some strain on the services and contractors to be able to get the certification done within the report time. However, we are working diligently to have these at 100% around December, January this year. Fire management risk assessment, we are 100% compliant. Asbestos, we are 100% compliant. Legionella and water hygiene, we are 100% compliant. And our passenger lifts and special lifting equipment, we are also 100% compliant. It's worthy to note, I haven't added into the report as it's not a new item, but it's worthy to note that we continue to engage with the regulator, and since we've been working with them, there's a clear uplift in our compliance levels across all areas, and we are working very positively to get that final element of electrical testing to the 100% value, which will address a lot of the concerns that the regulator may have had at the start when we first started this process. Any questions in relation to those areas that I've just discussed there before I move into damp, condensation and mould?
Any questions? I've got a question. Has anyone else got a question? Okay. My question is, well, my observation, great to see where it's 100% compliance. That's fantastic. My other question is, I did ask this, and I think I always ask it, particularly in light of the publication of the final Grenfell report, is about personal emergency evacuate, well, PEEPs as they're known, which is plans for people with disabilities and mobility issues, how you would evacuate them in the case of fire. Now, we've talked about, I think, in previous meetings that they're there. There's not an obligation, although I think the current government has said there will be an obligation. How are we doing on that? It does come obviously under fire management risk assessment.
So, yeah, thank you, Chair, for that question. So we work very closely with our housing colleagues, and they undertake a number of key actions, both with tenants and engagement with the compliance and the emergency services. Some examples of that could be we have up-to-date information and sign-up packs for when people initially move in, which gives them absolute clarity on fire processes and procedures. We've done extensive work on providing posters on the back of each flat's front door, again informing of the correct procedures to follow in the event of a fire. The services also carry out individual person-centred fire risk assessments to help identify who could be deemed as a high risk or who may need additional support in if an evacuation is required. And again, the housing service works closely with not only the individual in preparation of that, but also the compliance team to put a PEEP in place where that would be required. We have fire safety on our tenant meeting agendas to provide reminders, and we have started to carry out drills in each of our schemes. The first round is nearly complete, and we plan to undertake these every 6 months. And not only are the drills undertaken 6 monthly, but they're also accompanied by an article about the importance of complying with the drills. And this is evident particularly in our sheltered housing newsletter, which went out in August. And indeed, the compliance manager has also attended a number of sites just to inform some of those tenants in some of those sheltered schemes about pieces of work that are being undertaken as part of fire door replacement programmes.
Thank you. I know Sam Sharf wants to say something. Can I just quick supplementary to that is that obviously sheltered housing is a target, yes, but we do have some older, longer-term tenants, and how well are we informed about what their changed needs might be? And should we perhaps be telling our tenants, if your circumstances have changed, let us know, so we know that you've got extra evacuation needs? And I just wonder how we need to address that from the people who have been there for some years. There are people who have been in a council accommodation for some years. We won't know unless they tell us that there are some changes, or unless they've had a tenancy audit. So I just wondered how we might tackle that generally, and perhaps that's something we should address.
So again, we work very closely with our housing colleagues in terms of how we communicate with all of our tenants across our housing portfolio. I'm not cited or knowledgeable about all tools and functions that they would use to get out to all of those groups, but and I'm not sure if Sam is in a position to be able to support me in answering that question.
Okay, Sam,
we also have Laura with us online, and Laura oversees our sheltered housing. So if I know she's coming in later, so she might not be behind there, but she might want to jump in. Laura is there. I will add a couple of points, and then Laura can clarify, Chair, on a couple of things. I think Sean probably covered most of it, but just points of clarity. So we will have PEEPs all available for all those in sheltered housing. Your point about more broadly tenants that are in our general housing stock, it's a fair point that we need to go away and look at. I think what we have been talking and discussing is where we've got particularly complex buildings, that's where we would prioritise our work. But our knowledge of individual circumstance does rely on tenants coming forward, and I would use this point to urge tenants to come forward if they feel like they aren't comfortable in evacuating procedures within their buildings, because that would help us, because this will be like you say, until we've done tenancy audits, we are slightly blind to change of circumstance across the whole of our stock. Laura may have something more detailed.
Thank you, Laura.
Nothing further to add from what Sean said from a sheltered housing point of view. Thank you.
Can I ask, we've got the Open Door magazine, perhaps we should start telling people, if your circumstance, let us know, because we have no way of knowing, and we can't get round every tenant to do a tenancy audit now, but I do think it's quite important. But you have to remember that although you might have the stay put advice, people's instinct can be just to leave, so we need to be aware that may be necessary. And I know it's a big ask, but I think it's something that, particularly in the light of other events, that we do need to make sure we're doing that. Thank you. Any other questions or observations? Sorry, over there. Oh, yes. Hold on, Harmony.
Yeah, can I come back to sheltered housing? I mean, it's great to hear that there's all this stuff apparently in place. I've lived in Brandon Court for 2 years now. There has never been a fire drill. The other residents I talk to are very confused about what they're supposed to do in case of a fire, and they have zero idea of what they're supposed to do in case of a fire if they're not in the flats. So great idea, all this stuff is supposed to be in place, but in practice, it's not.
Thank you, Harmony.
I'm happy to come back on that. Brandon Court, I'll have to double check the date, but I understand a fire drill was undertaken there in August. It wasn't one of the ones that we still had outstanding, so I can provide that date. Fire safety information is or should be on the back of all flat doors for individuals so that they've got the information to hand as well as in the tenant handbooks. But I'm happy to pick that up separately with you in terms of Brandon Court specifically, and we can raise that at the next tenant meeting to address any concerns.
Is that okay, Harmony?
Yeah, that's good, except, I mean, this fire drill in August, as far as I'm aware, it didn't happen, so, and nobody's mentioned it. So it may have happened on paper, but in practice, it didn't.
Laura, perhaps you can reassure Harmony about that or tell them more what happened, yeah?
Absolutely, yeah, I'll pick that up with you, Harmony.
Thank you. And perhaps we need to just double check what's on paper and what's actually happened. Not everyone in sheltered housing is necessarily has issues around their memory, do they? So I think if you think it hasn't happened, it hasn't happened. Not as far as you're aware, anyway. Thank you very much. Any other questions? No. Can I ask Sean to do the bit on the damp mould and condensation? Otherwise,
thank you, Chair. Okay, so this moves us into Appendix A of the report, damp condensation and mould, otherwise referenced as DCM. And again, this data is up to the 1st of August 2024. So looking at point 1 under reported cases, we've seen a minor decrease over the summer months as we would expect. However, there is a heightened awareness of DCM issues and implementation of more accessible reporting mechanisms. So table 1, we designed after the last Housing Scrutiny Committee, where we were asked to break out the types of reports that had come in, had been completed, and then we added some additional lines in there around no access, planned works that are outstanding, and then a bottom line number of outstanding figures. So to summarise table 1, since we started recording DCM queries in April 2023 to the 1st of August, we have had a total of 605 reported DCM cases. We have completed 560 of those. 22 we have as no access, and planned or in progress, we have 23 cases in the pipeline. So we have an outstanding figure of 45 outstanding cases against the 605 reported issues around DCM. The team are constantly working to address these. Some of the no access, or a lot of the no access pieces are not from lack of trying to get into the properties. It's a lack of tenants at times either not being available or it's proving tricky to get into the premises with approvals. But we work closely with our housing teams to look at tenancy agreements and how we can use other measures to gain access to those properties to ensure that our compliance levels are improving in terms of closing out cases that are there. It's also important to note that on those completed items, we've brought in an additional step as a customer service good practice. And what I mean by that is that after the job has been completed, we arrange for a surveyor to go out to that individual property 6 weeks after the job has been undertaken to ensure that the DCM issues have been resolved. If not, they can be reactioned and back out to suppliers to undertake works. And we also have added in a stage where we do a follow-up call after the surveyor has been to the property to ensure that the tenant is satisfied with the works that have been undertaken, and or if there are any additional issues that we need to be aware of. Moving on down into the report, we have given a brief table to identify where out of that bottom line number of 605, how many of those cases are contained to one particular room, or if they are limited to 513 cases that are shown as more than one room in a property, or they're limited to an individual item or a room, for example, a bathroom. And we can see there that we've got 513 cases in more than one room and 92 cases limited to areas such as windows, doors, or only bathrooms. And some of those, the 92 cases could be connected to venting of a particular area, ensuring that the extraction fans are unblocked and that there's free flowing of air, all the way down to more severe examples, which which the team has identified in table 3. We've tried to break out categories of DCM, both in major definition all the way through to minor works, and again that's self-explanatory in terms of numbers and examples. And then on the bottom of that table we've identified as other, and used there's a multitude of smaller type works that are relatively quick to inspect, fix and provide an outcome to those DCM reports, and that's indicated as a number of 253. Below table 3, we've put some definitions down there for easy reference, ranging from definition of no access, leaks, insulation, solid brick construction, overcrowding, etc., etc. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That was a comprehensive report. I find it quite useful. Councillor Robertson.
I'm interested, you mentioned AWAB's law in the paper. AWAB was the poor young little boy who died as a result of mould in the flat he lived in Blackburn. As I understand it, there hasn't been an actual decision on what requirements the law will have for dealing with this issue, but it is likely that there will be a requirement for hazards to be investigated within 14 days, starting fixing them within 7 days, and emergency repairs within 24 hours. And my understanding is that our City Council is working to those timelines and will continue to do so until there is actually something issued by the government on the matter. Is that correct? And do you think we are managing to stick with those deadlines?
Yes, that is correct. We introduced these timelines quite a while ago, so we could set the bar from the offset before there was any real definition of AWAB's law moving forward, or indeed if it comes into a statutory compliance requirement. So that's the reason why we've added DCM into the overall compliance reporting format. The team is working diligently to maintain those levels, and with close scrutiny of reported items, we will then move accordingly to be able to provide the resources to address that in the timely manner that is laid down. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Gawthorpe-Wood, sorry.
This really follows on from what the points that Councillor Robertson had raised. I'm a bit concerned, this is quite a tight timescale if that has to be introduced. And I was also worried where you've got no access and haven't been able to get hold of someone, what can you do? How some of those you clearly do get access eventually, but we still have you had 22 with no access. So I wondered if you could comment on that. Thank you.
So by design of table 1, it has identified those no access areas, and the team is currently working through mechanisms to understand and ensure that or how we get into those properties where there may be some challenges. As I said earlier, we are working closely with our housing team to see where there is some leverage in being able to get into a property. We do regularly try to contact the tenants, and if that's not successful, then we need to refer to our housing colleagues to give us some advice and guidance on how we can gain access to those said properties. But looking at table 1, it's done as we identified, in that it's identified those areas of concern, and that we need to build in processes and procedures to be able to address that in a timely and safe manner.
Is that okay?
Thank you, Sean, for that. This is a very useful appendix. Thank you for the tables. Keep us posted. Thank you.
I've got Councillor Tong next, I believe, yes?
Hey, yeah, thank you, firstly, can I say, to all council officers for all of their hard work on these compliance updates. It's really good to see what we're doing to keep residents safe. Now, DCM is a really, really big issue across the city, especially in my ward. I see the impact it can have on people all the time. And one thing I really like is the fact that every time we get a new compliance report, you can see that we're really refining this sort of system, and we're getting more in-depth feedback, and that's allowing us to address some of the more fundamental problems which other councillors have raised. Something I wanted to ask about was a comment made on page 41, which says a more efficient and comprehensive system for recording, monitoring and reporting will be established, ensuring timely and accurate management of DCM-related issues. And that sounds great. That sounds like a really, really important project. I was wondering if you get some more detail about this, and especially a possible timeline for getting something like this established.
So the compliance team have introduced a system where we've been able to gather and collate up-to-date information across our portfolio on the position of compliance across all areas, DCM being one of those. We are working with our current provider, who is a specialist in asset and repair management systems, which will have some elements in there that will allow us to fine-tune our recording of compliance. How that looks at this moment in time, I'm not in a position to be able to comment, but we are working diligently to find a solution that meets the needs of not only the organisation in terms of recording, but keeps our tenants safe and dry within their own households.
Thank you.
Councillor Martinelli?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. I agree with previous comments that it is very helpful to see it laid out in this way, and that's very much appreciated. I also agree with previous comments, I think, as discussed about need for access. I have really two questions. One is about the figures, and the other is more about how we manage things. And the first question really is, obviously the table is very helpful, table 1 we're looking at, but I couldn't quite tally the numbers presented in this report compared to those presented in the report at the previous meeting of the Housing Scrutiny Committee in June. So we had a table there which showed, for example, DCM reports in May 2024 at 86 when we saw these figures in June, and yet we look at this table here and it says 35 cases in June, and indeed the figures are completely different in the tables from the last Housing Scrutiny Committee and this Housing Scrutiny Committee, and for essentially every month. And therefore I'd be grateful for some clarification on why they're quite so different and what mechanism we're using to assess that in the first instance.
Yes, I'll have to go back and scrutinise the previous report to work out how those differences have occurred. The data and the table one is a work in progress, so we are diligently and regularly reviewing the numbers, and they may fluctuate slightly. I need to go away, review that, and understand if what the gaps are for, and then I can come back to you and give you an explanation.
No, that's fine. I'll email you now. Thank you.
Any more questions? No. Can I suggest we proceed to the vote on this? It's quite straightforward. The recommendations on page 37. It's really, we're just noting, note the progress of the compliance-related work. So those in favour of that?
That's unanimous, Chair.
Yes. And does the Executive Council for Housing approve this recommendation?
I do, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And now we move on to agenda item 6, which is Julia's first talk to us tonight, and it's about the rent regulation error update report. So Julia, would you like to introduce this?
Thank you, Chair. This is a short report providing an update in relation to work on the correction of the rent regulation errors that were identified at the back end of 2023. Since we brought the last update report to you in June, the key actions that we have carried out are to contact all of the affected current tenants again in July of this year with an update on progress. And as part of that letter, we informed those tenants that the council had received a regulatory judgment from the regulator of social housing, which I know the committee are aware of. Really, that regulatory judgment confirms what we told the regulator, that we realised that the rents that were set were wrong, and that we felt the right course of action was to correct the rents and refund any overpayments, and the regulator has agreed with that in the judgment that they gave us. We've met with the Department for Work and Pensions to have some discussions with them about how we tackle the overpayment in respect of universal credit. We've been working to test how we will make those changes from a housing benefit perspective and deal with the calculations of any overpayments to be able to repay the DWP for any overpaid housing benefit. And we've been working hard to validate the refunds that we calculated. So we did some estimated calculations at the back end of 23-24 to be able to include something in the accounts for the year. And we've spent some time since then with an officer working diligently, going through thousands and thousands of calculations to try and make sure that 20 years worth of data is as accurate as we can get it, so that we have a position where we've got refunds that we're confident we can make. That work is progressing really well, and we hope to have that finished within the next 2 or 3 weeks. We also have recruited now to the rent regulation customer project manager, and I have a start date of the 30th of September for that new member of staff. We did have to go out to advert 3 times to recruit to that post, but we have secured a really good candidate, and I'm pleased that she's going to be joining us at the end of September. So she will be taking that work forward with a team of staff that she will recruit to manage the refunds going forward. The biggest risk at the moment is really the DWP and the approach that we will need to take to repaying any overpayments of universal credit. The DWP have acknowledged our request. They are working on it, but they are working on it at a national level. So it's not just Cambridge City Council that they need to tackle some of these backdated adjustments for. They have a number of local authorities and other registered providers where they need to do backdated adjustments. So it's not a single local issue. We're part of a bigger picture, but it does mean that that's probably our single biggest risk in terms of the timescales for us being able to begin the refunds. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for all the hard work that you and your team and others have been doing since you first reported this to the committee. It's not an easy thing to deal with, but you've done really good progress so far. Any questions? Well, thank you, Julia. So, oh, there is a question. Oh, you're hidden behind the little monitor there. Sorry, Councillor Tom.
No worries. This isn't actually a question. I just wanted to add that I really appreciate, and I'm sure we all do, the really hard work that's been put into this. I thought it would be a good time to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, I always put on this DWP question mark. I mean, I note in 4.5 you say you haven't received and you chased up your official letter to get a response. You got an acknowledgement. Any idea how they're doing? How many other local authorities have they got to deal with? And have they been able to give you any idea of timescales? Please.
Yeah, so we have chased it again. We have received a response just this week. So since we published these papers, which is where they have said that they are dealing at this on a national level, they haven't divulged how many other local authorities they are dealing with, but they have asked us to quantify how many current tenants we have that we are anticipating refund that are currently in receipt of universal credit. And they have asked all of the other providers for that same information. So they're clearly trying to quantify on a national level the number of cases they need to go back and revisit so that they can resource that appropriately at their end and make the appropriate decisions. They did recognise in their response that they know that we are waiting for, a formal response from them and that they will progress things as quickly as they're able. But they didn't give us any timescales, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Thank you, Julia. No more questions. I suggest that we put this to the vote, and it's on page 51, the recommendation. So those in favour?
Unanimous, Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much. And the Executive Council for Housing, do you agree with this recommendation?
I do, Chair.
Thank you. We're not making Julia's evening any easier because we're going to ask her to do the next one, which is the garage charging review, agenda item 7.
Thank you, Chair. This report is presenting the findings of a review of the garage and parking space charging policy, which was last reviewed in January 2018, so it was time for a review of that policy. We took a similar approach to the approach we took back in 2018, where we brought together a working group of officers, councillors and tenant representative to ensure that we had sort of cross-party views on any proposals that we brought forward in relation to these charges. Where we set rents as a council, we have very little discretion because they're subject to national formula and regulation by the Regulator of Social Housing. Garage and parking space rents is an area where the council can set its own charges, and therefore we needed to explore a number of options before we brought the recommendations forward. The recommendations that have been brought forward move us to a position where the proposals base the charges very much on the person that is renting the garage, as opposed to being more based on where the garage or parking space is and the purpose for which it's rented. This will provide us with a structure that is more difficult to administer, but there was a recognition from the group that this will recognise quite significantly the intention of the provision of these garages and parking spaces. So the reason the HRA provided these spaces originally was to provide parking for council tenants alongside their occupation of their property. And the proposals in this report try to keep the charges for that client group at a lower level by charging other customers slightly more to ensure that we still deliver them within the same cost envelope. The proposals that we have in here allow a 30% reduction in the price for the right to park spaces, which at the moment are on the ironworks and timberworks sites at Mill Road and Cromwell Road. There may be others on future sites, but they're the sites where we have right to park spaces at the moment. So a 30% discount will be provided for council tenants renting those spaces, recognising that they're not quite as secure as a council garage, where somebody has their own garage with their own door. We are suggesting that we provide a 30% discount for council tenants who hold a blue badge, or for anyone within their household that holds a blue badge. And that's subject to the second circulation of one of the appendices, so I could confirm on there the position in relation to that discount. And in order to fund those discounts, we are suggesting an additional increase on garages rented to private residents in the city, a charge of 10% more than they are currently paying, and an increase in the premium for businesses and commuters from outside the city, where the premium was £6 and the premium from April next year is proposed at £12. So this ensures that we really keep the garages and parking spaces as much as possible for council tenants at a lower price bracket, and that we utilise that resource for other residents and other customers at a slightly higher price, so that we can kind of balance the income that comes into the HRA. And I'm happy to take any questions that anybody's got.
Thank you, Julia, and I was part of that working group. I'm not really declaring interest, but I was the elected rep part of that group. Councillor Robertson.
This is a great example of the fantastic work that Julia has done for us over the years. This was done in double quick time and needed to be because of the imminent imposition of the regulations for not parking on the streets of ironworks. And we needed to get this underground garage into use as soon as possible by recognising that it isn't the same as a parking space where you elsewhere in the city, where you always can go to your place on the car park. In the underground car parks, you have no allocated spaces, because there is the electrical vehicle charging points, which have to be available for everybody to use as and when. So it's not the same. It's also not as secure as garages. So I think these issues have been recognised and brought into effect in this new set of regulations. And I hope that we will accept them. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to add there as well, the point that I made, and I think others made on the working group, is that, and I think might be there in the report, is that basically ironworks and timber works are at affordable rents. So any parking charge on top of affordable rents, which are obviously more than social rents, it will be a bit of a challenge for some lower paid or lower income tenants who do need to maintain a car. Thank you. Next person I've got is Councillor Pounds.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and thank you very much, Julia. It's really welcome, because it's been quite an issue on timber works, which is in my ward, and I know it has been the same on ironworks. What my question is that there is still an issue, particularly with reserved places, and in fact even spaces outside some people's houses, is that other people are parking there, regardless of whether it's right in front of somebody's house or whether it's a reserved space. So what are we going to do to try and make that more obvious, to mark them? I think something does need to be done, because they may be reserved for a certain house, but if nobody knows that, then it's not much good to the tenant.
Thank you. So that's certainly something I can take away. Historically, spaces that are allocated to specific properties, we've been encouraged not to mark them with the same property number as the property address, because it kind of identifies where the car belongs and where that household might not be at home and that sort of thing. So we do try to mark them in some way, but not to match them directly to the property. We can, as part of new tenant information on new sites, going forward, be very clear about which spaces are, lettable to individuals. Some sites, the spaces aren't rentable. On some sites, the parking is available for all of the residents on that site, and it does depend on the site and the planning conditions. So we can be clear in the documentation on new sites the basis for which the spaces are available. We can be clear whether or not they're ones that are chargeable and people need to rent them. And obviously, tenants can contact their housing officer if they do have issues on that site. On places like ironworks and things, we as Ben indicated in an earlier response to a question, we do have a TRO about to come in place. So on some sites, they can enforce the parking on the sites. On other sites, we can raise concerns with residents from a housing management perspective and contact the residents to inform them. I think so. It's a variety of options depending upon the site, really.
Thank you. Councillor Thorthorpe Wood?
I realise I should have declared an interest because I do rent a council garage near my home in Albury.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lee's the next person I have down.
Hi, I think we welcome this. I think this is actually something Councillor Porra has previously spoken or at least questioned why non-tenants were paying the same rate as tenants. So we do welcome the change. I just wanted to ask how we set the price for non-tenants, so residents but non-tenants, because this does seem very affordable for most people, and I imagine most people who are renting a garage, an extra garage, is a luxury, I guess, and I just wondered if we could maybe have charged more for it, to be honest. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. But we did have some discussions about the level of premium that we did apply to private residents on top of council tenants. We wanted to introduce a differential, but we did want to be careful not to, lose the renters that we have in the spaces at the moment. So once this policy is set, the charges will be reviewed on an annual basis as part of the budget setting report. So there is an option to increase that differential in future years. But I think initially there was a kind of recognition that we wanted to balance increasing cost in one area to fund keeping costs down and reducing them in other areas without losing the people renting those garages and ending up with an increased number of void garages, which would bring no income in to the HRA at all. So it's about achieving a balance.
Thank you.
Councillor Bagent.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to what Councillor Pounds has just said, I'm working on a case with the housing officer on Timberworks, where somebody has bought the site on the road when they bought their masonette, and people keep parking in it, and I've been asking for some bollards to be put in to stop that happening. Am I working at a different sort of system than Dinah has? I mean, we may not have cooperated on this, and I don't know why that's happened, that's our fault. But is that the same sort of thing that you were just talking about?
Yes, so effectively I think what I'm saying is that each site will be slightly different. There are some sites where we do put bollards in. There are other sites where we have TROs in place and carry out enforcement. Other sites where it's about us communicating with the residents on that site what the parking arrangements are on that site. If you have any specific concerns on particular sites, raise them with us, and we will look at what the best options are for trying to, make the parking as straightforward as possible for residents on those sites. It isn't always possible for us to put bollards in, particularly on parking spaces at the side of a road where somebody's got a parallel park into it. Those sort of spaces are not suitable for putting bollards in for people to then be able to kind of get in and out the adjacent spaces. So we do have to look at each site on a site-by-site basis. But if you have any concerns on a particular site, raise them with us and we will work with you to try and get the best resolution.
Can I, Chair? Who would you suggest I actually speak to? So I've spoken to 3 housing officers so far and nothing's been done yet. And when somebody owns the site and comes back with their car and can't park in it because somebody else is parked in it, where do they park? Because if they park in the wrong place, they could, in fact, get a ticket and probably will once the TROs come in. I mean, the parking at Ironworks, I understand, is chaotic. It's chaotic at Timberworks as well. People are parking on the pavements. We have effectively not got control of this situation, and it's something that needs tidying up. They've already knocked one of the street signs down twice because it's in the way. Who would you suggest I contact?
If you send a query to me, Councillor Bajan, I'll see what I can do. It does highlight the fact that if the roads are adopted, that is maintained and managed by county, there's certain influence we can do under a TRO, and if it's a complex site, the handing over process can lead to frustration. So send the query to me and I'll work with Julia and see what we can come up with on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tong, I believe, yeah?
Hello. So, yeah, it's really good to see some of the changes being made here, specifically in regards to acknowledgement that garages often get used in multiple ways, including for things like storage, which is acknowledged on page 59 and 60. That's a particular element of this I'm quite interested in because of, well, I think we need to be careful not to induce demand in motor vehicles, but we also need to effectively help residents that do rely on them in some aspect. Something I wanted to talk about in relation to the idea of garages being used in another function is what are we going to do about potential antisocial use of garages? This is a more sort of long-standing problem, but it's mentioned on page 60. You know, we're going to continue to make sure they comply, I mean, users of garages comply with the acceptable use policy. But I was wondering if there were any ideas on how to continue to make sure that happens and perhaps go even a little bit further, because I have seen instances of garages being antisocially used and the disruption that can cause in certain communities.
Sam Sharp, yeah.
I'm happy to take it away, but I'd say that we would manage antisocial behaviour in the same way for the management of garages, just like we would in any other area. So if you're observing behaviour that is not the fit to how a garage or the area should be used, then you should call that in to the team. We have a team that look after these areas. There isn't any other specific way other than, I guess, maybe you're thinking about some sort of education to those that are renting garages about what their uses should be.
Well, I presume that's in their agreement when they sign up, what their usage should be. Can I ask if we did have do we have a garages officer still in the housing services? Was someone, I don't know if that post is filled or vacant or whether it's been shared out amongst others.
We do have a garage officer post. It is, I believe, about to become vacant at the moment, if it isn't already, but we will be recruiting to that. So there is in the structure a dedicated post for dealing with garages.
That may help address some of the issues that have been raised here if there's someone going around and checking on things, yeah? Thank you. Any further questions? Oh, yeah, Harmony.
Yeah, and the tenants at the Timberworks, especially, will really appreciate this reduction in the high demand right to park space. Councillor Lee mentioned that they were inexpensive charges, and if you're working, then yes, they are. But there is still quite a high proportion of tenants in those areas who are on benefits, either looking for work or disabled benefits. Now, if they're looking for work, they are expected to travel for up to 1 hour to find work. Therefore, they need vehicles. Therefore, they need parking spaces. You are talking about 1/5 of their income to pay for one of these parking spaces. Now, I appreciate that looking at reduced fees for people on benefits was not in the remit when this was looked at, but I would suggest that it should be noted and should be looked at some point in the future.
Any response?
Thank you, yeah. So we haven't proposed as part of this report to charge council tenants who are in receipt of housing benefit any differing rate to any other council tenant. We very much have tried to keep the prices down where we can for all council tenants because, you know, as a local authority, we are letting homes to those on the council housing register broadly. And we want to make sure that we try and keep the prices as affordable as we can for all council tenants. In the research that we did, we didn't come across any other local authority where they did charge less or give a discount to residents that were on housing benefit, but there is no reason why that can't be taken into consideration in a future review, but it wasn't something that we considered as a proposal at this stage.
Thank you. I think that's a useful commitment to continue to look at that. Thank you very much indeed. Any other questions at all? Okay, then I suggest that we move to the vote, which is on it's on page 57, yep, and it's just to, recommend to those in favour of the two recommendations. Recommendations 1.1, 1 and 2, that's it, yeah. Okay, those in favour.
That's unanimous.
Thank you. And can I thank Julia again for sorting that out, because I think it's quite a key thing. And the Executive Council, do you accept the recommendations?
I do, and thank you, Julia, for doing it so quick as well. Thanks.
I'll move on to agenda item 8, which is the, it's the zero tolerance policy, which is now going to be renamed the Fire Safety in Communal Areas Policy. And I believe the officer to introduce that, will that be you, Sam, yeah?
Laura's going to...
Oh, Laura, you're speaking on
introduce
that.
the
Sorry, I
paper.
didn't realise that. I'm going to be prompt, had I? Okay. Laura, who's the Housing Services Manager, will introduce this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This paper seeks approval on a number of recommendations following a review of the existing storage in communal areas zero tolerance policy, which was approved in 2018. The review recognised the need for us to consider if we are effectively enacting a zero tolerance approach, as well as ensuring that we communicate the policy and make sure it's accessible to everyone. So the first recommendation, again, following feedback highlighted in the review, is proposing that the name of the policy be changed to Fire Safety in Communal Areas to better reflect the overall purpose of the policy and ensure that the fire safety element is emphasised. We're also seeking approval within the first recommendation on the changes contained within the policy, which include ensuring that it reflects the latest legislation and demonstrating how we meet that legislation, as well as providing greater clarity around the policy's aims and purpose and clearer guidance on both the landlord and resident responsibilities. It also includes new timescales for the removal of items in communal areas, streamlining that into 2 categories and reducing the amount of time given to remove items. And that's to help ensure that risk is better managed and, again, allowing us to be very clear with residents. And finally, it asks the Executive Council of Housing to support officers in enforcing the policy. I hope the report's clear, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. I know that Diane's got a question. She's already told me she'll have one. Diane, what's your question?
Thank you, Chair. Mine are not exactly questions, but they are observations stroke comments, and in no way would I like the issues that I'm going to mention to prolong the meeting or have a debate or discussion, but I feel that I need to raise these issues. There are 3 things: resources, logistics, and a definition that I would appreciate clarification on. With the considerably reduced timetable, which I fully support, I'm really fully supporting the recommendations, but there are some things that need ironing out. From the point of view of resources, they are both financial and staff resources, because I can imagine a considerable extra load being put on both. The other one is the logistics of whisking stuff away within 5 days. From the point of view of the requirement of vehicles to do that, and I imagine that the council is going to need a ginormous warehouse to put all these things in, because I'm sure Mandy will comment from her resident inspection observations that just moving a few things is the tip of the iceberg.
It is, greatly.
The other thing is, I was very interested to read in the report, and I missed it when we had our briefing, so I do apologise for bringing this up now, that residents are advised to report stuff that is dumped on landings, staircases, communal areas, etc., using the fly tipping reporting vehicle on the council's website. Last year, I had cause to do that and had my fingers rather curtly wrapped, because the sort of things being left by residents in blocks of flats in communal areas is not fly tipping. So I think we need a clear definition of whether somebody that's leaving their discarded furniture on the landing is or isn't fly tipping.
Thank you for those points, Diane. Laura, do you have some answers?
Yeah, so to respond to the first point about resources, so I think the previous policy, the most urgent items were on a sort of 2-day timescale as opposed to 24 hours in the new policy. So we don't expect the resource requirement to be too much different than it already is in that area. Items in the second category would still have needed to be removed under the old policy, and this revised policy is just moving them up the priority list. However, we do recognise the resource implication, and we've been in conversation with colleagues in streets and open spaces who will be referred to support if there are significant numbers of items to remove, for example, sort of large scale fly tipping. And in addition, items that are reported to the out of hours teams at weekends will be referred to the streets and open spaces team for removal, which should help to remove some of the pressure from the officer. In addition, I think we'll be really focusing on ensuring that we communicate the policy well. So we've got an article in Open Door magazine planned. We've got a letter planned to all residents, which will include our fire safety leaflet. And we obviously intend to publish the policy on the website. So our aim really is that those measures will help to better educate individuals, and that should lead to a reduction in items stored in the communal areas in the first place. Also worth noting probably that the community's redesign project, which is ongoing at the moment, is looking across all teams to assess resource level, and that will include the posts involved directly in delivering this policy. In terms of logistics, I would have to go away to colleagues on the sort of operations side in City Homes, just to confirm with them what the arrangements for both vehicles and storage would be. But I understand they have been considered as part of putting the policy together. And again, the definition using the fly tipping mechanism is something I would have to go away and just clarify for you. But I appreciate that both of those are important things that we need to consider.
Thank you, Laura. Do you think you've had your questions answered, Diane? Or have you got anything further? You. I'd like to just ask a question, which I did ask at the briefing. I still want it a bit clarified. As a resident in one of in Ironworks, we had a letter from the management companies because they seem to be they look after some of the fire management issues, and I think we need to ensure that the policy that we have as a council for our tenants is reflected when it's under the auspices of the management company, and I think that's a bit of a grey area, and I want a reassurance that that's going to be properly done, because we had a letter saying, we've walked around with these things are done, we'll take them away, and I'm just thinking, but that's not the council saying that, that's actually the management company. So I think we need to ensure clarification and say, what are their powers? Have they got powers to do that under that kind of thing, or is it just the council that has those powers? I'd want some reassurance and clarification on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And following the briefing that we had, I did take that back to our assistant director, and there's commitment from her that, assuming this policy was passed, we would go back to management companies to ensure clarity there and to work with them to carry out this policy.
Thank you. I've got Mandy, you had your hand up.
Basically, because I do a lot of inspections for the council, I can't see how you can say somebody's fly tipping at on like the stairs and that. Basically, that my argument with it is the fact that it shouldn't be there because it's a hazard for the fire brigade and for the ambulance service. It can't be classified as fly tipping because it's actually, their tenants are actually paying for that building. The outside of the building, yes, I can understand the law for fly tipping.
Yeah, noted, and I will go back and provide clarification on the definitions around fly tipping.
Thank you, Laura. Councillor Martinelli.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's an interesting area, isn't it? And I think it's a reasonable enough thing to bring to council. I can understand the justification for doing it. But I think kind of what we're hearing about is a mismatch between policy and the enforcement of the policy. And I guess from our view, there's very clearly a spectrum of clutter here, and there are things that we would all recognise and understand to be dangerous and fire safety risks, and we've all heard about how it can be difficult to get those removed even with the current policy. But then there's also the other end of the spectrum, isn't there, where there are very small amounts of personalisation that I don't think realistically could be considered to be a major fire safety risk that this policy, you know, and the previous one seeks to rule against. So I guess the question for the officer here is, you know, what measures are we using to see how well we're enforcing the current policy, and how will we understand how well the policy is being followed for those larger hazards in particular? What measures are we using to assess that? Because you know, it strikes me that that's actually the much more important part of this debate. We would all agree, I think, that there are very clear fire safety risks associated with some of these behaviours and items, and I think we'd all want to be sure that they were being removed appropriately, rather than just having the most hardline policy on paper written and signed off.
Thank you. Laura?
Yeah, so I mean, the legislation's clear that we have sort of the legal duty to ensure that all of our routes of access and exit are clear and safe, and the guidance from the Home Office on the compliance with that law does support a zero tolerance approach. In terms of how we monitor that, our officer that oversees this policy does produce a quarterly report, so that we can identify you know, what's been removed, particular areas of concerns, patterns, and that's presented through to one of the monitoring groups so that we can oversee it that way. I think what we're trying to do with this, you know, this review of the policy is to be really clear on what categories, you know, we would consider different things to be in. So we've got, you know, the immediate risk, which are things that, you know, really increase loading, fire loading, and obstruct exits and entrances. So, you know, flammable liquids, motorcycles, anything sort of furniture-wise blocking an escape route. And then we've got the second category, which is high. We consider high things like bicycles, doormats, and plants. And while they might not block an exit, they can certainly cause obstruction, you know, especially in the event of a fire when you've got potentially a smoke-filled area. So so I think, yeah, you know, we're seeking to clarify the sort of levels of risk and be sort of proportionate in our approach and response to those risks. And we monitor it, as I say, through a report that the officer produces.
Is that okay? Yes. Okay. Harmony?
Yeah, I see that the report does actually address mobility scooters, but I just wanted to make 1 or 2 points about that. I mean, to start with, it mentions storing scooters inside their homes. Well, that is a massive fire risk because homes don't have large spaces that you put a scooter in. So the scooter is likely to be stored in the passage by the door, blocking the exit to the door. So that in itself does not appear to be a good suggestion. I know it says the council will work with residents to provide solutions, but losses in mobility can happen quite quickly. So someone may move from not needing a scooter to needing a scooter quite quickly. And if you're going to be asking them to move that scooter within 5 days, it's just not tenable. You're not going to be able to make a provision within 5 days. Are we going to see some space for some kind of leeway for scooters that are stored in places where they are not obstructing exits until such time as alternative provision can be found?
Laura, could we make sure we look at that? It's obviously a particular issue on mobility issues on the scooters, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you, Harmony, for pointing that out. Sorry, who we got down there? Oh, sorry, Councillor Bajan.
Thank you for that. I think you raise a very interesting point. Often when these pieces of legislation are brought into being, there are little anachronisms that need to be sorted out. Clearly, it's not acceptable, and the officers would reinforce this, for any means of escape to be blocked. But for a person that's living in a flat and has a mobility scooter and it's in the hallway, they are in fact cutting off their means of escape. And this is something that is a bit of one of those things that might not have been thought of, and I'm sure the officers will be aware and add this to their risk assessments for these people. And it would be good, I suspect, let the officers speak, but if these people got in touch with the council and talked to them about it. Because we do need answers for these problems. I remember a long time ago doing a lecture on fire prevention, and the big call is unplug everything at night before you go to bed. And somebody asked me a question, well, I've got a lamp by the side of my bed, should I unplug that? You know, and sometimes there just has to be a balance struck. But it's a very interesting point. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura, so you've noted all those things, yes? We'll get clarification on them. Thank you very much indeed. Any other questions? I haven't got any more. Thank you very much. Can I suggest that we proceed to vote on this, which is on page 69, the recommendations 1.1 and 1.2, I think, yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. Those in favour of the recommendations?
I think that's 11. I think that was 11, sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yeah, sorry, Chair, 11.
Any, okay. Are you, you're in favour, Diane, or are you, yeah, good. Anybody against?
None, Chair.
Anybody abstaining?
2, Chair.
Okay, does that add up the right numbers? Good. Thank you. And Councillor Bird, do you accept the recommendations of the report?
I do, and I will look into that about the mobility scooters. I'll have a chat with officers as well. All right? Thank you.
What do you think about having a break at this stage?
Well, we could have a break. If we think we need a break, we're trying to be quick, but I'm sure everyone would welcome a break now. And then we've got the big medium term, whatever it is. Yeah, we've got the medium term financial strategy thing. So that's a long one. So quite right. Should we have a break now?
Could I suggest a 10-minute break? Because since one of the elevators is not working and if somebody needs to step outside, it might be better for a 10-minute break.
I would suggest 10 minutes anyway.
Okay.
You might otherwise have queues for the lorry. Okay. Thank you. 10-minute break back in, well, it's 7:16 approximately. Okay, thank you. Welcome back to the Housing Scrutiny Committee for the 17th, that's right, 17th of September 2024. We're now going to take agenda item 9, which is the Housing Revenue Account Medium-Term Financial Strategy for 24-25. It's when we sort of review and look at how things are going. And this will be Julia presenting this. I want to just point out that was an equality impact assessment published online, and copies are made available to members of the committee. Okay then, I'd better identify you officially, because this will be your last time. The Assistant Head of Finance and Business Manager, Julia Havels, to introduce, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is your medium-term financial strategy report, which is presented around this time every year. Last year we did delay it until November, but generally it's presented in September of each year. It's one of two opportunities in the year for us to review the HRA finances and the 30-year business plan, and to make decisions about the way forward in light of that review. So this particular version of the MTFS allowed us to update the assumptions that we have in the model, both internal and external. So making assumptions about inflation and interest rates and rent increases. One of the biggest changes in here is that we're not seeing at the moment a reduction in borrowing rates that we were hoping we would see, and that has a significant impact on the business plan. We're also still seeing increasing costs, particularly in maintenance and major repairs type of expenditure. And we're seeing challenges in, where we build new homes, the sites, site constraints and costs of new build. So we need to factor all of those things into the HRA business plan and bring forward some recommendations that deliver us a sustainable position over the 30 years, making sure that we balance our investment against our existing stock and in the delivery of new homes. So some of the key changes that we have incorporated as part of the MTFS this year, we are recommending that the rent flexibility is applied from April 2025, and that is something that's allowable within the rent restructuring formula that local authorities are required to adhere to, which allows local authorities to charge 5% above the formula rent for a general needs property and 10% above the formula rent for a supported housing property. And in that context, supported housing includes sheltered housing. Introducing this would only impact new tenants or tenants taking on a new tenancy. It wouldn't impact existing tenants all the while they stayed within their existing tenancy, and it would only be at relet that we will be applying those higher rents. In applying those higher rents, it will over time generate some additional income to the HRA business plan that we weren't otherwise assuming, and that will help us to deliver the programme of works that we have included, amongst other things, to improve our stock to EPC standards by 2035. There is a chance that we will be expected to bring forward that deadline. At the moment, there isn't a stringent deadline on when local authorities have got to achieve EPCC, but there is a suggestion that might be brought forward to 2030. So having it built in at all, with the borrowing costs at the level they are making it difficult for us to demonstrate that we can afford to continue to retain that programme, and by introducing the rent flexibility, we help mitigate the impact of that. We also want to maximise the number of new homes that we can deliver, and in doing that with a borrowing rate that's still sitting at the levels they are at the moment. So we're assuming at the moment a current borrowing rate of 5%, dropping to 4.28 next year, and then 4.1% on an ongoing basis. That compares to a rate of 2.5% that we were assuming 2 years ago, and that makes a huge difference to the cost of borrowing and therefore the viability of any new build schemes that we bring forward. So another of the key changes in here is a move to a portfolio approach for delivering new homes, and that is the subject of a separate report on tonight's agenda, so I won't go into that in any detail. But the proposal is to move to that portfolio approach, but also to ask the government for a significantly higher grant promise than we are currently achieving on our new build sites at the moment, with an assumption that we can receive grant over the 10-year programme of just over 208 million, which would balance that contribution so that the council would be borrowing significant sums of money, but the government would also be investing significant sums of money in housing in Cambridge to ensure that we can deliver as many new homes as we can, but in a way that is sustainable for the HRA and doesn't put the financial viability of the council's housing revenue account in jeopardy. We've set a savings target for the coming year as part of the MTFS, which is always one of the outputs of this review. We've retained a savings target of 4% of controllable expenditure, so we have a savings target of 218,000 per year for the next 5 years built in. But we are suggesting that we would reinvest 50% of that, so 109,000 of that could be reinvested in strategic reinvestment to allow us to respond to regulatory changes, legislative changes, spend to save type initiatives where, you know, investing some money now might reap some benefits in future years. So that's what's included and would be the recommendation for the way that the budget is constructed for 25-26 when that comes back in January of next year. And I'm happy to take any questions that anybody's got on the report.
Thanks, as always, Julia, for your concise review of what this report is about. Anybody got any particular questions? The chair of the committee can ask it first. Who else has got their hands up? Sorry. Councillor Martinelli. Anybody else?
Thank you, Julia. I'm just wondering, do we have a plan B if our ask from the government is rejected?
So we have been clear in the report that if we can't achieve grant at that level, we would have to review the programme, and we can review the new build programme looking at the number of homes we deliver, the mix of homes that we can deliver on any particular site, the rent levels that we might need to charge on those sites. At the moment, we have a programme that has a mix of social rents and affordable rents. It may be that we need to consider the rent levels that we charge and also the levels that we build to. So we are currently building to, you know, higher sustainability levels and would like to continue to deliver to those higher sustainability levels, but all of those things would need to be reviewed if we don't receive a grant at that level.
Thank you.
Councillor Martinelli.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've got a few questions, but I think the most important one has already kind of been alluded to, which is I think this report is really admirable in its transparency and outlining the challenges for the HRA going forwards. And that's been apparent for the last few meetings, but is clearly becoming more and more of an urgent concern. And I guess my question really is about timelines and decision making, because I guess what I'm worried about is that what sort of timeframe would we be wanting to hear about ongoing government funding to maintain viability of the programme? Or is there a danger that we are sort of holding out for this, and whilst the programme is ongoing, it becomes very difficult to roll back, and that does put the HRA in a degree of financial jeopardy? So I guess what I'm feeling is we're getting to a point where we need to either have clarity on whether this government funding is forthcoming or bring that review forward. And for example, I can't see that if we're in the same position next year, it would be responsible for this committee to be continuing to roll forward these very ambitious and in many ways admirable plans if we don't have clarity on that funding because of the borrowing levels being as they are. So I guess what I'm asking for is a steer on timelines and urgency of decision making around the viability of the HRA, which I appreciate is a big question, but I think it's an important one.
Yeah, so in response to your question, obviously we anticipate that there may be some announcements as part of the autumn statement in October this year. Whether we will get any clarity on any changes to the grant programme as part of those announcements, we don't yet know, but we may get some clarity on some of the other areas of social housing as part of the autumn statement. There is a suggestion that the rent settlement may be given some stability, and that rent increases may be approved at CPI plus 1% for 10 years as part of the autumn statement. We haven't built that into the MTFS at the moment because it's not something the government have announced themselves directly. It's been something that's been reported and mooted in the press. So that is something that we would hope to have some clarity over in the autumn statement, and maybe some announcements around grants and investment in new build. We are clear that the schemes we have approved at the moment are within the levels of borrowing that we are suggesting the council could afford to take out. So there's no suggestion that we'd need to row back on any of the schemes that we've currently got approved. We would need to consider, you know, the risk in terms of future schemes that come forward from January onwards around whether or not the council should approve those schemes if we don't have any clarity over the grant ask going forward. One thing to say is we're not saying at the moment we don't have a sustainable HRA. So we're not saying, as it stands at the moment, with the stock we've got at the moment, we have a sustainable HRA. What we can't afford to do is to build the much needed new homes unless we get some additional support to do that. So, you know, we're not suggesting that the HRA is, a cliff edge or anything like that in financial terms. It's very well managed and it's financially stable, but we don't have enough resource to meet our aspirations for new build or to improve our homes above EPCC, which we obviously would like to do. We'd like to move towards net zero carbon in our existing housing stock. We don't have the resource to do that. So they're the things that we're kind of flagging as being the challenges and the risks. And each decision is going to need to be made as each scheme is brought forward, depending upon where we are with the government at that stage.
A supplement to that, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's very helpful. And I think, yes, I appreciate what you're saying about it not being a going concern at present, but it's about the future of it, isn't it? And I think that is very helpful to hear a bit more about the anticipated timeframes. I mean, I guess on a related question, notes in the report about it being considered prudent to undertake external opinion or have an external opinion commissioned on the risks involved. Is that therefore coming forward over a similar time frame? Presuming that's external consultancy. Just wondering about that, if I could have a bit more detail on what nature and form that will take and how that will be reported to committee and so on.
So there is a commitment to get some external views. We currently have borrowing of 213.5 million as a housing revenue account, and that was borrowing that was enforced on us by the government as part of the self-financing settlement. So that wasn't a decision the council took to borrow, that was something they had no option about. Any borrowing that we take out going forward to deliver new homes is obviously something that we are going to be taking a decision as a council to do or not to do, and therefore we have to take it in the knowledge of the risks that we take on with that borrowing. So it's not just the rate that we take the borrowing out at initially and the interest payments that we need to support, it's also the risk around the rates that may be available when that loan matures and we need to refinance that borrowing, because the current business model doesn't recommend us or doesn't suggest that we will redeem that borrowing. It suggests that we will continue to refinance it in order to be able to maximise the delivery of new homes. So there's risks around what the refinancing rates might be in 20, 25, 30 years' time. So it's considered prudent to get some external opinion on the risks associated with that borrowing, to look at the HRA business plan and the forecasts and the projections that we have in there, and to consider those risks in view of projections and forecasts over borrowing rates in the medium and long term. That piece of work is expected to be undertaken during 2025. So, I think it's something that we recognise is something we want to do, and in the short to medium term.
Thank you, Julia. That was a good explanation. Do you, any further questions to Julia? Because I've got others waiting, yeah? Okay, thank you. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you. There are, this portfolio approach is definitely something that we needed to do in the light of all the complications of the grant levels and the type of housing we're allowed to produce. I think that this MTFS contains a huge number of assumptions which could easily be changed by the government. We've mentioned some of them, but there's also right to buy, grant levels from Homes England, Even the local housing allowance has an impact on rents, changing the rent levels, borrowing limits, interest rates. There's a huge number of them. And I think we're assuming that, we're not assuming, we're going to have another set of figures for the next meeting of the Housing Services Committee in preparation for the setting of the budget for next year. One thing we can thank Rishi Sunak for is calling the election earlier than anybody expected, because it means we can get on with it and hopefully get some new figures out of the government in time to set next year's budget. That's about the only thing you can thank him for, but it's certainly effective. The other question is, who's going to produce the new budget if Julia is at home? Have we got to make sure we've got someone who knows what they're doing, because it's going to be complicated. I don't know how you can answer that one. It's a bit unfair, isn't it?
I'm not sure I can answer both of your points, but in relation to the first point, yes, the MTFS is built on a raft of assumptions, and all of those assumptions can change in both directions. You know, they can get better and they can get worse. It's one of the reasons why we bring it back, not only as part of the MTFS in September, October, but also then review those assumptions as part of the budget setting report in January, February, because we know those things change. So looking at them twice a year means that we can respond to any known changes or any changes in forecasts or estimates. We do seek external opinion on those as well, and we model a number of sensitivities. So one of the appendices in the report looks at a number of sensitivities that looks at what would happen if something happened to inflation or something different happened to interest rates, and allows us to sort of demonstrate the impact that that would have. So, you know, yes, these are estimates and they're forecasts, but they're reviewed regularly and they are based on the best information we have at the time, with exemplifications of the impacts of any changes so that people can understand what impact that would have. In relation to who's going to take it forward, there is no direct replacement for me at this moment in time, but I'm sure that somebody will be in post and there will be somebody else bringing it forward in January. Jodie Etherington, our Chief Finance Officer, will be leading on taking that forward with his team to ensure that somebody is, delivering a budget report to you in January with solid assumptions in it and with information that you can rely on for decision making.
A very professional response, thank you.
Thanks, Julian, for that reassurance, but we'll still miss you. That's an aside. Now, any further questions? Yes, Harmony.
Yeah, just one little comment about the portfolio approach, which seems to be rather a big thing, which we've got little detail about, but that's fine. I actually understand the rationale behind the approach. I can see that it's probably necessary, but I do think we need to be very careful that we don't slide into compartmentalisation or ghettoisation when we're adopting a portfolio approach.
Chair, shall I answer that when I come to the update report?
I think that might, so we'll just deal with this, but I agree there are questions around the portfolio approach, so we'll deal with it then. That'd be a good suggestion. Okay, any further questions to Julia? Martinelli again, yeah?
Thank you, Chair. So just a few more technical questions. So I guess one of the things I was interested in was the tenant satisfaction measures which are included in the report and online. And what I was wondering is there a target or comparison that these are measured against as part of the social housing regulator's assessment? Obviously they're very variable from what I can see of the City Council housing. And the second thing I just wanted to comment on is, because it's been raised, was about the EPCC and the works to make sure that's the kind of minimum standard for our housing stock. And I think over the years we've discussed a lot about the compromises engendered between building houses and funding retrofit and all the other things the HRA has to do. I think from our point of view, really, we all feel that actually we can't compromise indefinitely on the climate angle here, and therefore I think we would see that EPCC really being a minimum standard that we have to attain. And I think from our point of view, therefore we would be advocating for decisions to be taken, accepting that as something that simply has to be achieved. But that's really just a comment rather than a question.
I can come back on the tenant satisfaction measures. So they've come into force, and I think this is now the second year first main year of measuring them. There is benchmark data that we can provide that looks at peer comparators. I think the one caveat that we're just trying to work through at the moment, and we do have Kate, who was with us earlier online, is just making sure about the methodologies. So at the moment, every housing association and local authority is doing these, but they're doing them slightly differently, and we have seen quite significant skews depending on whether they've been done telephone or online. So we just have to caveat some of that we haven't, or we've attempted to set a target, which we could probably bring something back here for, but I think, yeah, that's all I'm saying.
Okay. Yes. Okay. I just want to make the point, you brought up the tenant satisfaction measures and all the new social regulation, all that kind of stuff. I brought it up before. We're trying to do some of these tenant satisfaction stuff with a very small number of staff. So can we make a request, I think, as tenant reps, elected reps, that we look at that provision for next year's budget, because I think it's really stretching the individuals concerned to do all the work that needs to be done around these new measures and ensure they're keeping up to date. Is that a fair thing to say? And I've asked it. I don't know how we as tenants can ask that it's, and leaseholder can actually ask that it's put in, but it is so important because there's one person and another person. There's not enough staff, I don't think, to do the work that we need to do. And of course, that is the implications of the changes and regulations and reporting. But it is very, very important that we get that right.
Yeah, happy to pick that up with the team and yourselves in the next rep meeting.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, any more questions? What we have to do now is no questions in the rest of the report. So what I have to do is we have to take it in two parts. So I will ask you to vote on the recommendations on page 85 and its recommendation where it's 1.1. You've got two recommendations for the part one, which is I chair this. So those in favour of recommendations on page 85 going through to page 86, 1 and 2 recommendation, those in favour of those, yeah?
Nine in favour.
Okay, anybody against?
None against.
And some abstentions, I assume?
3, Chair.
Okay. Now then I can breathe a sigh of relief and hand over to part 2 of the agenda of the meeting to the current chair of the committee.
Thank you. We're going to now turn to vote on agenda item 9, recommendations 1.3 to 1.5, page 86. Please note that recommendations 1.3 and 1.4 are recommendations that the council will consider on October 10th. Okay, all those in favor? All those against? All those abstaining?
That was none against and 3 abstentions.
Okay. Does the Executive Councillor for Housing agree with the recommendations?
I do, Chair.
Thank you. We will now turn to agenda item 10, update on new build council house delivery. Please note that Appendix 4B, Suitable Housing Design Guide, was published online, and a hard copy of this appendix has been left on your seats. Please, could the Assistant Director for Development introduce this item?
Good evening. We have 6 recommendations for the update report, and what I'm going to do is just draw your attention to the key parts of the report, and then I'll be happy to take questions. The first part of the attention to that relate to what my colleague Julia was talking about in terms of our ask and what might happen on the 30th of October. And that is that this council has been part of a campaign led by Southwark Council on looking at how we can fix the council housing system. And there are 5 key points, and that is a new and fair and sustainable HRA model, reforms to right to buy policies, removing red tape on existing funding, which I'll talk a little bit more about, the new long-term green and decent homes programme, and urgent action to restart stalled building projects. And that's very much the campaign drive with lots of councils to the Deputy Prime Minister, which we hope will result in some change of policies on October 30th with the autumn statement. The second thing I'd like to draw your attention to is 4.31, and you'll see 997 homes have been completed. We are very close to our 1,000th home being handed over, and we will mark that occasion when that is due, which is in the next month or so. But that is a tremendous achievement, and that's over 600 council homes delivered, as well as the 400 market homes there. Just an update that Fanshawe has also been received resolution to grant a planning committee again in August 2024, and that links to some of our frustrations with the grant funding in relation to Homes England, which the report does draw your attention to. We've also had planning submissions for Newbury Farm. That's 150 homes, of which 60 will be affordable, and ATS Merkits, 70 homes, of which 28 will be affordable. So these are schemes which will be unaffected by any, if there's the 208 million grant ask is not forthcoming. I then would like to draw your attention to 4.81, and this is the portfolio approach to development. And I'll spend a bit of time on this just to clarify and make sure everyone is clear on the approach. There are a couple of corrections I just need to note for the record. Page 221 should read 2,500. And page 223 in 7.3 and 7.31 should be 22%. So if we can just note that for the record. The approach to the portfolio development approach, mixed tenure portfolio approach, is really a statement of intent by this council to say we can deliver this amount of housing so long we receive some help from government. So we've set out the stall financially. This is what we need. We've also set out our stall in terms of where we can deliver. In other words, we're ready for the autumn statement, and I hope the government will certainly look at that very favourably. So in terms of the approach, what are we trying to do? We are saying, with the right help, we can deliver more council homes, but we're also saying that we will deliver more homes overall in a mixed tenure approach. That does mean more market homes. More market homes helps us to cross-subsidise the affordable homes, reducing the cost per unit. So that makes it more financially prudent. The other aspect of the portfolio approach is to ensure that by stating what we are delivering and what we intend to deliver, it becomes, in effect, a material planning consideration. And the reason why that's important is because at the moment, every site is judged on its red line around each site. So some sites are more suited to flats because they're constrained. We can go high, but Greater Cambridge Housing Strategy, for example, says, where are the houses? And we've been unable to say, well, we're building houses in some areas and we're building flats in other areas. With a portfolio approach, we can say to the planning committee, actually, we are over-delivering on houses, we are delivering on flats, and we are able to deliver better than the Greater Cambridge Housing Strategy. And so it will form part of the material planning consideration, which is really important for us. We expect to be held to account, and it will still be up to the planning committee to decide whether they take this on board or not. But what we are guaranteeing is that the percentage of affordable will never fall below, in its running total, below 40%. We've got a target there of that we can achieve is 53%, and the overall programme, if you include those that are about to be handed over, we think we can achieve 58% council homes. So this is a transparent approach to be financially prudent, but also to ensure that we deliver the right housing, the right flats across the programme, so that we can demonstrate to planners that this programme is delivering what it needs to do. I will just talk through some of the other items in the paper, and then I'll take questions. The other aspect is to draw your attention to is the CAM standard, which is in a separate appendix. This builds upon the research that's gone on with the Passive House certified homes that we have delivered, but also the Passive House or close to Passive House homes as well. And what we've done, we've had a look at that, looked at the cost, the difficulties of achieving certification. It is very, very high standard. And what we're essentially concluding is that the additional cost to get to the certification is not outweighed by the reduction in energy bills. And so therefore we're proposing a close to Passive House standard. We're not allowed to call it Passive House Principles or CAM House, which was one of the first ideas, so we're calling it the CAM standard. And that is very close to Passive House certification and ensures the energy bills remain low for tenants. And as part of that commitment, we also will come back next year and explain further information on terms of the energy monitoring, but also the roadmap to net zero as well. And then the final appendix I just want to draw your attention to is the framework for change for North Cambridge. And this is looking at what people and residents see in Arbury and King's Hedges in terms of what they like about the place and what they'd like to see improved. And that does include our own tenants in Kingsway and in Arbury Court. And this is about starting that conversation to see what people are looking for so that we can look at the next steps in the coming years. Happy to take some questions now. I hope that's a useful summary.
Thank you, Ben, for a very complete and encouraging paper. Jenny, Councillor Gorthrop Wood.
Okay, so some people may want to ask about the portfolio approach. Not surprisingly, I'm going to be asking about communication on the framework for change for North Cambridge, because that's my area. Although, you know, I'm looking forward to seeing what you come up, you know, further information. But it is, I'd like you to comment on that further. On the Passive House pilot project and CAM standards, I think you've actually answered this in the text, but one of the issues is about ensuring that future energy use is measured, because that will help us to get towards our net zero, I think. And that's something that I know the planning members on the planning committee are very keen to see, and I'm keen to see that too. I did wonder also, and this is the detailed question on Stanton House, how many people had moved already. So more general question on, on Arbury Court and Kingsway, what this means, any more information you can give to me, and then on the passive standard and Stanton House. Thank you.
Certainly. So the communication on the North Cambridge framework for change will be very much based on the East Barnwell framework for change, where there was early conversations. We call them conversations because we are asking community groups, people who use doctors, people who use schools, people who may use community centres, as well as residents. This is residents who are tenants, but also people who are homeowners. What do they like about this place? What do they like about the parks? What are the areas that we can do to look at improving? So it is very much, the first part will be a conversation, and we will, of course, brief councillors on our approach before we take it any further in terms of that. So that would involve quite a few people in Sam Sharf's team, in terms of the communities team, as well as our own team as well. But we want extensive engagement to find out what people are looking for. So the second question, so the Stanton, I don't have the actual figures on that. I don't know if Sam Sharf, no, so I will have to come back to you on the actual definitive figures, which I'm happy to do so. And then on the passive house, in terms of, or any monitoring of new build, that's something we're very keen on. It does come with a cost, but we are engaging with the university, who are looking at research projects to look at monitoring, but not just of energy, but something a bit more wider. They're very keen to see what benefits there are of people moving to new build homes from their existing homes. So we think there's a real opportunity to demonstrate health, improvements in health and welfare, as well as just the energy bills there. So that's something we're actively doing at the moment. We do propose to come back with a more comprehensive report on the 21 passive house unit on energy consumption as well. So that will be, we'll bring that back next year.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I better say I was referring, of course, to the ones in Aragon and Satterfield Close in King's Hedges. So thank you for that. That sounds very interesting, and I look forward to updates. I do have to say that, you know, there is what I want to kind of avoid, if at all possible, is the kind of thing that we've seen with some other developments. Arbury Court and Kingsway, or when people can get it, if they have wind of this, and can often get the wrong end of the stick. So I do hope that we can have a good communications plan, and obviously I and other ward councillors will want to be involved in that as fully as possible. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. I have an answer on Stanton House that I can give. So we have 14 voids, 4 in notice with 2 offers, and there's 14 remaining tenants. So it has been quite a quick, following the decision last time, there's been quite a quick movement, and it's been very positive with the residents there.
Thank you for that. Councillor Tong.
Hey, I will try and be very concise because I'm a little bit ill. But just as a general bit of feedback, it is quite disappointing that we're not trying to put in that little bit of extra effort to reach passive house standards. I know that the quantity is really, really important, and we should be proud of how many houses we're building, as you've emphasised during the briefing. But we do need to keep in mind the quality of what we're building too, and pride ourselves in trying to meet those really high standards.
Would you like to respond?
I can, and that, if we did continue down the passive house certification route, that would mean we would have to build fewer homes. So we think it is better to build more homes and to a standard that we know will continue to reduce energy bills. So that's the approach we've taken. It is a trade-off, and it's about being financially prudent as well, maximising the number of homes we can build.
Thank you. Councillor Swift.
Thanks, Chair. I read the agenda item 10 with interest. Just some general observations. I think it's fantastic about 1,000 council homes. That's absolutely great. I think that Rachel Reeves, with the autumn statement, there's been a lot of talk about how we need more housing in Cambridge, tens of thousands in Waterbeach and all the rest of it. I really do think it's incumbent on the government to actually make some substantial grants to make sure that that can take place. We can't have economic growth without some national input. We can't rely on our residents to stump up all the money for this. So I hope that the autumn statement, she will be imaginative in how she actually invests in the future of this area. With Passive House, I do think, I've been convinced that the near Passive House standard is 95% there, and I think that it's much more realistic to actually go with that rather than have a sort of holy grail to have only Passive House 100% and have far fewer houses. One thing I was confused about, and this is a technical question, and I don't know if anyone here will be able to answer it, is about airtightness. I have a horror of not being able to open windows in the summer and the winter. When it says airtight, does that mean that there's obviously some regulation of the airflow without having windows openable? Is that correct?
I'm happy to answer that. So the air tightness is effectively, they measure this by blowing air into a building with the windows shut to measure any leaks that come out. And so if it's at 1, it's well below building regs. So it just says it's well insulated. That doesn't mean we design with windows you can't open and so on. So that's just a standard to aspire to, but it doesn't bear any judgment or make any statement on windows that can't open.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it also is good for acoustics, isn't it? The more airtight it is, the more soundproof it is. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Robertson.
I wasn't going to involve myself in this Passive House business, but the report actually says that they compared the Passive House with their land standard, and that the achieving Passive House certification is not cost effective or practicable on all sites. So even within one site, they had difficulty with some of the buildings being able to comply with all the detailed regulations. I think it's clear that we need to be pragmatic about this and go as all the way down the route towards real energy efficiency without paying Passive House for fees for something that is actually not practical anyway. So that's just my view on it. Anyway, I was going to talk about the programme approach, which I think we're proposing to adopt. I do think it's important that we have a system of recording what progress there has been in achieving schemes at different levels of funding and different levels of housing being produced. So the reporting needs to be changed a bit so we can see on balance how it's balancing and which way it's going, whether it's moving towards we're building for sale more than perhaps we want to, or it's being possible for us to build for tenancies. So I think some work on that would be gratefully received. Is that something you could be working on?
Yes, so the reporting is absolutely integral to the portfolio approach. That is also required by the planning committee. So we intend to report every quarter and expect to be fully transparent and for questions to be asked on that. So there will be updates every quarter as we do now, but perhaps in a slightly different way. This one will be updated and then it can be passed on to the planning committee as and when developments come forward.
Thank you.
Councillor Martinelli.
Thank you,
Chair. I mean, I think you've addressed this in your introduction, but I just wanted to double check regarding point 6.4 on page 221. Essentially, it's about the 40% threshold from a planning perspective. I mean, is your contention that, or is the council's contention that individual sites can be brought forward at sub 40% affordability because they're part of this portfolio approach? Would that be compliant with what I understand to be the local plan and proposed future local plan? Could you clarify on that point?
This portfolio approach is centred on the fact that our rolling total will never fall below 40%. Now, in this programme that we've shown transparently in 6.9, it never really gets below 50% anyway. But yes, the flexibility does allow that. And but at the moment on the schemes, it's very much towards the tail end of the programme where we may need flexibility. So on the schemes coming forward now, all of them, as shown on here, are 50% or above. But we don't know what the future holds. We don't know what the costs may be. Costs may surge again. They're not. They're pretty good at the moment. And so what this does is build in flexibility. But provided our running total is above policy, which is 40%, our programme is showing we want to surpass that at 50%.
Do you want to follow up to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have explained it, but I guess what I would have understood of the planning process, and there are obviously other councils that know more about this than me, is that if a developer came to the planning committee and said, oh, actually, we've only built 30% affordable housing here, but last year we built one with 50% over there, so we average 40, I'm pretty sure the planning committee would not view that favourably, but perhaps there's another mechanism that I'm missing.
So if another developer wanted to do that, in theory they could, but they would have to demonstrate with evidence that their programme is delivering above policy. Now, in some cases that does happen in larger sites, North Stowe or Marley or some of the fringe sites where they're doing it in phases. That might be possible, and the planning committee may take a view on that. But that's not something that has ever come forward in the past. But the same rules will apply. You can't just say, with no evidence, I'm going to do 30% here, but don't worry, I'll do 60% at some point in the future. That's just not going to work. That's not going to work with the planning committee, and it won't work with our programme at all. So it's always about ensuring that you're above policy right from the start.
Thank you. Mandy Powell-Hardy?
My question is to do with Eakin Road. The social rent for 64 buildings, I would like to know why on the original, when it first came out, there was prospects for flats being built there, and all of a sudden it's disappeared. It's now going to just be houses. What's the reason?
So we went through a long process of why that happened. So we started off with lots of flats, which clearly had a higher number, but that was a very high cost to the council. Also generated quite a significant bit of financial risk for the council. And actually, this goes back to one of the reasons we want to do the portfolio approach. We want to demonstrate we are delivering houses as well. And so the decision on Eakin Road was to deliver more houses, bigger houses. So although the number is below what was previously there, the number of bedrooms is higher or equivalent. So that was the reasoning for that on Eakin Road. But that's a good example of where we wouldn't get any credit. So we're over-providing on houses on Eakin Road once it's submitted for planning. But that wouldn't be taken as credit by the planning committee on a future scheme. So what we're saying is, well, if we build houses in some areas and flats in other areas, but the overall balance of the programme meets Greater Cambridge Housing Strategy meets planning policy, that should be a good thing.
Thank you. Councillor Robertson.
Yes, I was thinking about this. I have a concern about the way that Homes England restrict our ability to produce affordable housing. There's an example with Davy Road coming up. Is Ekin Road also hit by restrictions on the funding that they will provide?
So the way Homes England works at the moment is different to how we had the previous devolution grant or how Greater London Authority receives grant funding. So under the Devo deal or under the GLA funding, essentially a tranche of money is given to the local authority, and it is, you have this money, but you have to deliver X amount of housing, and we allocate where we think it's most appropriate, whether it's mixed tenure or 100% affordable. That's what we did with the 500 programme. Very, very successful, really helped our delivery programme. The way Homes England works now is you either have to fund 100% affordable, which is more expensive for the council, produces higher financial risk, or they'll fund any net gain, so anything above policy, which is 40%. So on something like Ekin Road, as it currently stands, then we're channeled into one or two routes here. So we've gone mixed tenure in Ekin Road, so that helps us offset the build costs, but it may mean we receive less grant, which is why we're part of the campaign to try and get more grant flexibility. It's not just us asking this, there's hundreds of councils across the country, outside London, that are looking for more flexible funding in order to deliver more homes. And if this government want more homes, they need more flexible grant funding.
Great, thank you for the explanation.
Thank you. Councillor Swift.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to ask about 4.2.3.2 on page 192, reforms to unsustainable right to buy policies. Over the last 40 years, it's been a huge thing, hasn't it, about selling right to buy and then the money not being allowed to be used to build replacement houses, etc. I probably should know this, but is there going to be national edict or is it going to be local? Who's going to decide about that, about whether, about reforms to unsustainable right to buy policies? Thank you.
I'll pass to my colleague, Julie.
Thank you. Yeah, so we are waiting for government consultation on the changes to right to buy. Any right to buy regulations will be national regulations, so it's not something we can make a local decision on. The current government have relaxed some of the right to buy regulations already with immediate effect from July, but they are planning to consult in the autumn on eligibility and on the level of discount that somebody gets when they buy a property under right to buy. So we do expect further changes to come forward after the autumn statement.
Thank you. Councillor Bajent.
Thank you, Chair. It's an interesting idea, the portfolio approach. I don't know if it's been practiced in other councils before or whether it's coming primarily from us. My real question is, if we decided to build a 100% for sale site, would that come to this committee before it was approved for being even the design of it being drawn up? Thank you.
So the first part of the question, this portfolio approach is undertaken by other councils, and in this case we were very much guided by Stephen Kelly, Director of Planning, who has worked in previous London boroughs in previous roles. If we were to bring forward, I think you were saying 100% market scheme, which would be part of the portfolio approach, then yes, absolutely. I would expect to bring it back and demonstrate this still meets the criteria that we've set out. So the total transparency is this approach. That's what it's all about.
Just to clarify, so my point really is, would it come to us to approve before we put in a great deal of expenditure? So before we designed it all and put all the money into place, that's really, so you don't come to us and say, well, look, we've designed this scheme, we spent £2 million designing it, and now will you approve it?
I think if we were doing something as radical as 100% market on a big scheme, we would expect very early briefing, as we would do as before we'd come here.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
I'm conscious I never answered Harmony's question on the portfolio approach.
Go ahead then.
Yeah. So if I remember, the question was around ensuring that we don't just have private in one area or market in one area and affordable housing in another area. Again, this approach is laid out to demonstrate full transparency that that's not our intention. There may be some slight variations, but we will be judged by our actions on this, and it does not make sense in terms of the council's corporate plan to deliver schemes which don't fulfil that corporate plan, and one of those is Cambridge Fair for All, making Cambridge for all residents of the city. So that is certainly not our intention.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, I think it's time to move to a vote on this. So we are going to vote on the recommendations on page 189 of the agenda. All those in favor?
It's 5, Chair.
All those against?
None, Chair.
All those abstaining?
That's 3, Chair.
Does the Executive Councillor for Housing approve the recommendations?
I do, Chair.
Thank you. We will now move on to item 11 on the report. It's the report on the outcome of rooftop feasibility study. First, I would just like to say that a part of this scheme is in Coleridge, the ward I represent, and just before the meeting started today, we were handed by one of the residents there, handed a petition with 21 signatures that were opposed to this project going through, to proceed, opposed to it proceeding, just to mention that before we discuss. Okay, so I'll turn it over to the Assistant Director for Development.
Thank you. This is a comprehensive report of the work that's been undertaken for the rooftop feasibility study. The level of work includes design work and some surveys around the possibility of increasing some housing above existing buildings, as well as retrofitting. And one of the study's approach was to see how intrusive it was, whether residents could stay in situ, whether it's possible to do it on the buildings, what the costs would be. It's relatively new as a building process, and there's been quite a comprehensive study in relation to that. The conclusion has shown that it is quite intrusive, so it would need residents to move out, first of all. Secondly, it is also quite costly, so although you are able to get additional stories, the retrofit, that doesn't outweigh the overall retrofit cost in relation to do that. And I think in summary, really, despite all the possible benefits, the cost in order to do that has meant it's prohibitive at this stage. We will just park the learning for now and perhaps revisit it at some point in the future for a different area, different scheme. But right now, the conclusion is that we're taking it out of the 10-year programme, and this report is to formally close this feasibility study.
Thank you. I have a question. If we approve these recommendations so that the project does not go ahead, when will the residents be notified?
As soon as possible. So we will ensure they're notified from this week.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I think we can move to a vote then. All those in favor of the recommendations?
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. That was unanimous. And I'm sure sorry. Does the Executive Councillor for Housing approve that recommendation?
I do, Chair.
I'm sure there will be many relieved residents to hear this decision. Thank you. We're now going to move on to the delivery, item 12, the delivery of refugee housing. And again, please could the Assistant Director for Development introduce this item?
Again, I'll be relatively brief. This is a good news story, cross-collaboration across teams in order to get funding from the government to purchase 4 homes for refugee housing. And the recommendations are relatively simple in that it's about proceeding to purchase 4 houses in order to add to our housing stock for that purpose for a budget of 2 million.
Are there any questions? Then I think we can move on to a vote. All those in favor, this is, the recommendations are on pages 283 to 284 of the agenda. All those in favor, please raise your hand.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Wonderful. We can then move on to agenda item. Oh. Does the Executive Councillor for Housing approve the recommendation?
I do approve, Chair.
Thank you. Now we turn to agenda item 13, redevelopment of the Davy Road flats.
That's me again. So you will have heard the questions before on Davy Road. Davy Road is an estate that has a number of issues around ageing stock. It's got a build form that is difficult to retrofit and bring back to standards that we're used to for a new build. And so the proposal is to look at a mixed tenure development of 90 homes. We're proposing 50% would be council homes, so that's 45. I should add, I should have said at the start, there is a correction on page 293. It should read 9, not 12. Apologies for that. So I can just note that for the record. There has been a consultation. It's been quite extensive consultation with the residents. We have narrowed down the development area, taking out Bracken Road and focused only on Davy Close and the garages. This is looking for approval, and we will be looking at a planning submission later this year, early next year. And we would be, as I've said before, we're looking at 45 council homes, and we would be looking at this high-level stage be compliant with the housing strategy in terms of their tenure approach. So that would mean you'd have market homes, you'd have social rent, and you would have 60% rents and 80% rents. We would be looking to achieve CAM standards on this one, so high levels of sustainability. And we would also be looking to Homes England funding under the current regime for 9 homes, which might equate to about £1 million. Or if there's changes in the grant funding, that might mean we can apply for more funding overall. It does mean that there will be some decanting of residents. There are 42 properties, all 2 beds, 32 tenants and 1 temporary accommodation, and there are 9 leaseholders, so there does involve some buybacks in relation to those leaseholders' property. But we will work, like we always have on any scheme, with with diligence, but also sensitivity with the tenants in order to find them alternative accommodation. One of the things that did come up in the question was about leasehold costs because of the planned works. Our proposal assumes that no bill would be sent to leaseholders for the year till next September, and then we would take it on a case-by-case basis if people haven't moved out by that time.
Thank you. Are there questions? I should say a few things first. The Equality Impact Assessment to this report was published online, and copies are available to members. They've been made available today. Also, please note that the information contained within Appendix 3 is considered to be exempt from disclosure. Should members wish to discuss this information, a vote will be needed. A vote will need to be taken to discuss the information in exempt session. If approved, any members of the public will be asked to leave the chamber, and the live stream will need to be paused. But are there any questions? Councillor Tong.
Well, I don't really have a question, but I thought I'd take the opportunity to just give some of my thoughts, because I do think council officers have worked really hard on this project, and they've done really well to work to the specification given, which is to produce as many homes as possible. But I think the issue with this redevelopment is the specification itself is kind of inherently flawed. So I admit, and I agree, that Davy Road, as do a lot of properties in Cambridge, it does need work done to it. I wouldn't want to deny that, but I don't think a good redevelopment of the site is going to be based around trying to play on the fact that we're producing a large number of properties as a kind of marketing exercise to, uphold the fact that we are a large house builder. I do think we need to think about what these properties are going to be used for, and acknowledge we're trying to build homes, not just houses. Because with the current proposals that are going forward, we'll see 32 properties for social rent be reduced to only 5, which is a massive reduction in the amount of social rent properties available. And we are seeing the problem of inequality in Cambridge get worse and worse. Cambridge is considered one of, if not the most unequal cities in the UK. And redevelopments like this aren't going to make life easier for working people. I have seen people being stuck on the council house waiting list for such a long period of time. And I couldn't, in good conscience, vote this proposal forward, because it does feel like a bit of a betrayal for the people that are very, very patiently waiting. I do understand there are financial considerations, but I think we need to focus our attention on really making sure we're providing desperately needed council housing at social rent specifically, because that's what the city needs. Yeah, that's my short statement. Thank you.
Would you like to respond to that?
I'll try and respond in part to that. As I say, these are high-level assumptions at this stage. There's still much more work to go on, and of course, there could well be grant funding associated with this. So the 5 social rented properties is based on a percentage based on what planning committee would expect as a minimum. So we put that in just as a guide. If that is followed through, another 29 would be 6% market rent, of which those people on universal credit or housing benefit, most of that would be paid for through that benefit system. So it does come back to my colleague Julia in the MTFS right from the beginning. We have to be financially prudent. I don't know, Sam, if you want to add anything, but the amount of social rent being built across the country is not very high anymore, because it's very difficult to make it financially viable. So what we're trying to do is build more council homes. We do have to do more different types of tenures, including social rent, in order to make schemes more financially viable. So I take on board your point. It'd be nice to do everything at social rent. It's just not financially viable to do that.
Okay, thank you. Diana Mintz?
A couple of observations. Actually, I'm also disappointed that the proportions of social rent within the portfolio approach and some of our schemes has reduced considerably. And that's an observation. I think it's very sad that we've had to go to this because there's also an assumption that everybody in council, social housing is on some kind of a benefit or pay their rent. Julia, do you have the someone have the up-to-date figures of how many people percentage-wise in council housing are on some kind of benefit that will pay their rent?
It's broadly 50%, so it's very difficult to measure it now because we don't have exact figures for those on universal credit, but it's broadly 50% of our tenants.
Thanks for that, because I think we bear that in mind, because an affordable rent is still quite expensive in relation on a low income, and it's where you define the low income anyway. That's not. The other thing is that's an observation on page 298. When we're quoting, we do it every time. It's only been different on one report. Is when we look at the local housing need. I think it's important to show the bands that the housing need is. So if you've got one beds, how many in A, B, C and D bands? Because I think that's a much better focus on where your need might be, because you might form, you've got, a lot of one beds there, but they're not really all in the highest housing need, and some of those that may sway your proportions wrongly somehow. And I just think that perhaps over the years now we're talking about building 3-bed houses. We're actually catching up with the fact we should have been building some 3-bed houses earlier on, because obviously 2 beds often become the need for a 3-bed house. So I think that's an assumption. I know it's happened lately, just an observation. I don't have a vote on this, just some thoughts.
Thanks for your comments, and I'll note them. I've written it down, and perhaps we can look at that in future reports. Thank you.
Diane Best?
Thank you, Chair. I think possibly I should have said this when the representative from Davy Road was here with her public questions, but I would like the Davy Road leaseholders to know that behind the scenes I have been liaising closely with Ben. The big financial issue for the 9 leaseholders is payment for the health and safety works that need to be done to the properties. But I'm very pleased that Ben has addressed this problem, but unfortunately the leaseholders in Davy Road won't know that I've been beavering away on their behalf.
Thank you. I guess I'll move on to the next question then. Thanks. Councillor Robertson.
Just a quick question. On the bottom of page 293, it says that the 40% housing required by the planning authority, but the requirements of Homes England mean that only 12 homes can be funded. On my copy it says 12. But if you're doing 36, if you're doing 40% of 90, that is 36. And we're building 45, so it should be 9, shouldn't it? Not 12.
Sorry, Mayor, I did make that correction at the beginning there, Councillor Robertson, just to note it, so it will be noted in the minutes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, I have some questions myself. This development is in the Coleridge ward, and I represent the Coleridge ward, and so I have talked to quite a few residents about this, and so I have some questions. First, about the consultation that happened there, I'm wondering why the response was fairly low. The percent of responses was fairly low. And related to that, on page 303, you say that there was 100% response from residents in the consultation that there was antisocial behavior. But 15, I think that was 100% of those who responded. Wasn't that clear in the document? So could you say something about that first?
Yes, certainly. I mean, on the second point, yes, we should have made that clear. Perhaps we could note that in the minutes that for clarity. Although it seems low, of the 42, I think, so we're saying 15 responded, 14 to 15. That's a reasonable response rate, around 30%. So although it feels low, that actually compared to other consultations or engagement is reasonable. Our impression or observation, officers went round and knocked on doors at Davy, was that was genuinely broad support for a redevelopment because of the concerns they've had about the flats there. So I imagine that's partly reflected in the response rate as well, perhaps.
Okay. My second question is around the current work done that's being done there, and for some of the refurbishment that's currently being done. So residents are asking, well, why was this even started when we had plans, pretty clear plans to demolish the building sometime in the near future?
There were greater plans, perhaps in insulation or other aspects in relation to the estate. So when this type of situation comes up, what we do is, or we work with the estates team to do the minimum. Now, there are some works that have to be done for health and safety, fire, whatever it may be. They have to be done. It doesn't matter, because what might happen could be delays in the process of planning, whatever it may be. People have got to be safe in their homes. So that's why that work went ahead.
Okay, thank you. And assuming that we approve that the executive counselor approves the recommendations tonight, when will people be able to start applying to HomeLink to move, for example?
So from immediate effect from tomorrow, they'll be able to contact Andrew Johnson and our team to start looking to be on emergency banding, and tenants will be able to look at new homes. Some may not be in a rush, but some may be, and we will of course help them.
And what is the likelihood that Fenshaw will be available for some of these residents?
That's a very good question. Interestingly, Fanshawe has been delayed somewhat in terms of the timing, so it all depends on the planning process. In an ideal world, they would match so people could move into Fanshawe from Davy, which was always an intention of ours, but it really does depend on the planning process in that respect. So I don't think we can make a guarantee, but we'd like to certainly say that that's something we'd like to happen.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Lee.
Maybe not so much questions, maybe more kind of observations. I also was kind of a bit surprised that this is based on a survey size of 15, which is not really a very good sample size, to be honest. It's not even a full rugby squad, so and there's not even unanimity amongst that reply. I think we could probably all agree that the flats at Davy Road have probably seen better days, and that's probably to be expected. I imagine that they were built in the 50s or early 60s. But it does seem to me that very often in this committee, we are hearing the same arguments again for flats, that they are in too poor a state to make it financially viable to retrofit or improve. And so the answer is always, let's knock them down and build again. And I just wonder then, at which point do we say, well, why are these flats in such a poor state of repair? I think we really need to be questioning how we are maintaining these buildings, and if it's just that the design of these buildings is so poor and that they've come to the end of their lifespan, what are we doing then in order to make sure that these new flats aren't going to need to be demolished in 80 years? Thanks.
Okay, so there's quite a few questions there. What I would refer the councillor back to is the rooftop report, which demonstrated, right, what can we do not to knock buildings down? How can we make that work? Do people have to move out? All of these things are inconvenient and difficult and costly. And the rooftop report did demonstrate it's really hard to retrofit and make it financially viable. Very, very hard. And there's a number of reasons for that. You don't get the lifts, you don't get the access, you don't get the the space standards or anything like that. So it's very, very hard. So the argument for redevelopment can be very strong in that respect. The house building of the 40s and 50s, some of that done was very, very quickly. There was a need for acute housing after the war, and so the lifespan of that housing is certainly coming towards the end, sort of the 50s and 60s in terms of that. But even if it's not, it's very difficult to retrofit. So in terms of what we're doing now, in terms of how long that will last, the standards are much, much higher. So whether it's the quality of the windows, the doors, or the building regs, or the sustainability, or the accessibility, level access, so the standards are far, far higher in terms of where we have to get to. And at the same time, if you think of further tightening because of post-Grenfell in terms of fire, so I think the standard and quality is high, and I'm hoping that these homes will last for a long, long time with those high standards, and people will continue to love living in them.
Because my question was, one of my questions was more about how are we going to ensure that we can future-proof these houses, as in, and what I mean by that is, are there any things that we can do to kind of make renovating and improving these buildings easier for future generations and future councils? Thanks.
Well, our design standard, Sustainable Housing Design Guide, does look at how we can build buildings to last for the future. And some of that's about placemaking, some of that's about looking at what the population might look like in terms of aging population. So there are certain things we can do. We can design out crime, we can ensure there's enough space, we can ensure future-proof. We do, in our employers' requirements, look at, well, if we can't get to net zero now, what might be the impact of doing that additional bit of funding, additional PV, batteries, whatever we might need, so perhaps extra storage. Very difficult to predict the future, but yes, that is looked into in terms of the design, but in order to completely future-proof, it's very, very difficult. We don't know what the future holds, how people will live. What we do know is people are getting older, an ageing population, so we can make it more accessible and ensure that people have space that they can enjoy, outdoor space and so on and so forth as lifts. So I think we're doing as much as we can compared to any other local authority, but I'd welcome your thoughts if you think there's what more we can do.
No, but that's great to hear. Thanks.
Thank you. I believe we are ready to move on to the vote. So the recommendations are on pages 291 and 292 of the agenda. All those in favor?
5, Chair.
All those opposed?
None, Chair.
All those abstaining?
3, Chair.
Does the Executive Councillor for Housing approve the recommendations?
I do, Chair. And thank you, Julia.
Thank you, everyone. That concludes the Housing Scrutiny Committee meeting. Good night.